When Eli vanished into the bowels of the orphanage, I thought I'd seen the worst of it. I was wrong. What followed wasn't just haunting, it was orchestrated. The voices weren't just echoes, they were summons, and the secrets beneath Delaware's forgotten orphanage didn't die with time. They waited. This is where the masks come off. This is where the story turns violent, vile, and unrelenting. What happened to Eli was only the beginning. What we uncovered next should have stayed buried. Volume 2 begins now. And this time, we don't run. We follow the horror into the dark. When people talk about Eli Turner now, it's always in hushed tones, as if saying his name too loudly might summon back what followed him into that crawl space. He became a ghost in the urban exploration community, a cautionary tale, a mystery, a martyr for curiosity. But someone noticed what the police missed. Her name was Callie Reinhardt, a Pennsylvania-based paranormal investigator and former digital archivist for a regional historical society. Her passion? Tracking folklore that had roots in truth. Her obsession? The Blackbird Forest case. Callie had followed Eli's uploads long before his disappearance, and when that final, unreleased video surfaced on fringe forums, leaked in fragments corrupted beyond full viewing, she knew something was buried deeper than just myth. She arrived in southern Delaware in the fall of that same year. No fanfare, no crew, just a notebook, a digital recorder, and a gut instinct she couldn't shake. Her first stop, the crawl space. By then, the area had already been resealed, cinder blocks laid, mortar smooth and fresh, no sign that anything had ever been disturbed. But just off to the side, beneath a gnarled root and an old child's shoe buried in soft soil, Callie found something. A weather-worn metal case, standard for photographers. Inside, Eli's second SD card. It was labeled with a sticker, peeling, faded, but one word was still legible. Listen. She took it back to her cabin, used a forensic recovery tool. The files had degraded badly, but one video remained intact enough to watch. Time-stamped May 2nd, 3:17 a.m., just under 4 minutes long. She hit play. The video begins in total darkness. A few seconds later, a faint amber glow blooms in the corner. It's unclear where the light is coming from. No visible source, no shadows. Then, a soft shuffle. The image begins to resolve. Children, 6 of them, standing shoulder to shoulder, all girls, ages somewhere between 7 and 10, wearing nightgowns that appear too clean for a ruin, all barefoot, all silent. The camera doesn't move, but the focus sharpens just enough to make something else clear. Every child has the same face, the same thin eyebrows, the same crooked smile, the same gap in the front teeth, even the same loose braid hanging over one shoulder, identical, as if photocopied, as if printed from memory. Callie paused the video here, frame by frame. She thought her player was glitching, but the more she examined, the more disturbed she became. The differences weren't missing. There were none. She let the footage continue. At 1:37, the children begin to smile. Not all at once. First, the girl on the far left, then the next, and the next, until all 6 are grinning at the camera, like they'd rehearsed. And then, without warning, they laugh. It's not laughter born of joy. It's something ritualistic, rhythmic, as if triggered by a cue just out of frame, and then, just before the footage cuts out, they all tilt their heads, in perfect unison, toward the same direction, toward the camera's right edge, and then, darkness. End of file. Callie stared at the frozen black screen for a long time. Then she rewound the video. She looked frame by frame at the girls' heads turning. She traced the vector of their gaze. And for a brief moment, less than a quarter of a second, her eye caught something in the far right corner. A rectangular object, framed in dust and shadow. A mirror. At first, it just looked like part of the debris, but when she zoomed in, enhanced contrast, and slowed the frame, she saw it. A figure. Her own silhouette, but not quite. The reflection wasn't standing the way she had been. It leaned closer. Its arms were longer. Its head tilted before hers did, and its eyes, black and unblinking, stared directly into the lens. Callie played the moment again. The same thing happened. The figure in the mirror moved first. Not a reflection. A watcher. Someone. Something on the other side of the glass. Pretending to mirror, but not bound by it. She paused the frame again. Enhanced brightness. The figure had a braid over one shoulder, a nightgown, bare feet, and a familiar smile. The exact same as the girl's. Same child, she whispered to herself. Again and again. She backed away from the screen. Outside the cabin, wind rustled the trees. And then she heard it. Just once. Faint. From behind her. Laughter. Not through the speakers, not from the device, from the mirror over her shoulder. She turned around and saw nothing, except her own reflection. Smiling. Callie Reinhardt left Delaware the next morning. She never published her findings, but in an interview conducted months later on a niche paranormal podcast, she said something strange at the end. The host asked if she believed Eli Turner was still alive. She answered slowly. Not alive, she said, but still present. Then she paused. I think he stayed. I think we all stay, once we see her. Who? The host asked. The first one, the girl who laughs last. The same face, the same missing tooth, the same smile, over and over. If you felt that chill, subscribe, because what we reveal next goes beyond Eli. It's always been there. To understand the echoes that still ripple through Blackbird Forest, we must turn back the clock, far beyond Eli Turner's footage, beyond local legends whispered on cold nights, and beyond the broken remains of bricks and mortar hidden beneath moss and decay. We step into the shadowed corridors of history, where forgotten truths lie buried, tangled within faded pages and half-burnt documents that time almost swallowed whole. It began in the early 1900s, a time when the rules that governed childcare in Delaware were, at best, loose and at worst, non-existent. Private homes, run by individuals or small groups, operated with minimal oversight, some slipping through the cracks of the law and into the cracks of the community's collective memory. Among these was a place known only in whispered rumors, a girls-only orphanage rumored to have been nestled just at the edge of Blackbird Forest. But no official records remain. The place existed, yet it did not. A ghost in the ledger books, an omission that felt intentional. Our investigation led us to scattered fragments, surviving local newspaper clippings, yellowed with age, their edges torn and fragile. Headlines spoke vaguely of unusual practices and disturbing reports that surfaced but were quietly suppressed. Articles that vanished without follow-up. Pages in the public record where the orphanage was never mentioned by name. But hidden among those faded reports was a chilling thread, woven carefully in the margins by unknown hands. The orphanage was, in truth, a front. A facade masking a dark, ritualistic group, an obscure fringe religious sect, who believed laughter held a supernatural power, but not laughter as we know it. No joyous giggling or spontaneous smiles. Their doctrine preached that laughter was a form of purification, a way to cleanse the soul of sin through prolonged and forced joy. Their motto was carved into the very walls of the orphanage dining hall. Through joy, we cast out sin. But beneath those words was something far darker, through accounts pieced together from survivors and local oral history, primarily from elderly residents and passed down family tales, we learn that the girls who lived there were forced to laugh for hours on end, not through kindness, but through coercion, punishment if they stopped, threats if they resisted. Some say they were locked in rooms filled with gas that induced convulsions of laughter, leaving them drained, broken. The laughter was a weapon, a cage, a spell. Those who failed were sent away, or worse. Once a month, the sect held what they called the joy burning, a grotesque ritual purporting to be purification by fire. The official story whispered among the locals was that these were controlled burnings of the forest's edge to protect against wildfire. But the truth, pieced together from testimonies and physical evidence found at excavation sites, was far more horrific. Children were herded into rooms or cellars and locked in, surrounded by flammable materials. As flames consumed the buildings, the sect believed that souls trapped in the laughter would be purified, released from earthly pain through the fire and their own forced joy. The screams and laughter were said to intermingle, the two inseparable in those final moments. The local woman we spoke to, Mary Hendricks, whose grandmother worked as a maid nearby, recounted stories told in hushed voices. They called them the Laughing Girls, said if you listened close you could hear them laughing even after the fire stopped. The ones who died, they said the fire never truly took them, that the laughter stayed. What's more disturbing is the silence that followed. No official investigations, no arrests, just disappearances, hushed rumors, and a landscape that slowly swallowed the ruins whole. Today, what remains are fragments, twisted remnants of a place meant to shelter and nurture, but which instead imprisoned and destroyed. Ruins where laughter still echoes through the night, carried by the wind, trapped between the trees. The theory, the speculation, supported by no small amount of eerie evidence, is that the souls of those children never left Blackbird Forest. They were caught, bound to the sound of laughter itself, an eternal spectral loop. And those who hear it, those who venture too close, especially after midnight, they are drawn in, called by that same forced joy, repeated endlessly. That's why locals warn, because some things, some memories, refuse to fade away. Some laughter isn't laughter at all. If this story chills you to the bone, if you find yourself pulled deeper into this mystery, consider subscribing. We'll continue to unravel the dark pasts hidden beneath forgotten towns and untold legends. Because Delaware's Forgotten Orphanage is only the beginning. Stay with us as we follow the trail of laughter and shadows, where every echo has a story waiting to be heard. This wasn't haunting. It was designed, ritualized, engineered. Hit subscribe because the forest remembers, and now it remembers you too. It began 3 days after the mirror. The investigator, whose name we will withhold for privacy, had returned to his modest home in Lewis, Delaware. He told us he'd boxed up all his notes, the footage, the corrupted SD card, and the field audio, locked them away. Not out of fear, he insisted, but fatigue. As if proximity to the orphanage had leached something from him, left something hollow just behind his eyes. But what followed couldn't be boxed up, couldn't be locked away. It followed him home. The first incident seemed almost benign. He had been editing footage at his desk, back in his upstairs office. The light from the screen cast a pale glow on his face. The room was still, the kind of stillness that makes a person overly aware of the sound of their own breath. And then it came. Laughter. Faint, unmistakable, like it was coming from the floorboards beneath him. He paused the audio, rewound. Nothing. He stood, expecting to find his neighbor's children outside, but the street was empty. Porch lights off, no movement, no open windows, just the sound again, inside now, not outside. Children, giggling, unseen. He told himself it was stress, that his ears were still saturated with the countless hours of footage from Blackbird Forest, that his mind was playing tricks. That night, he didn't sleep. The next morning, he found the clocks, each one in the house, frozen at 1:13 a.m. Every one of them. Microwave, stove, analog wall clock in the hall, even the small battery-powered travel clock that had no reason to stop. 1:13. He replaced the batteries, reset them all. By the following morning, the Staldor stay 1:13. He began to notice other things, the mirrors. It began subtly. Shadows he couldn't account for, a blur over his shoulder that vanished when he turned, his own reflection, blinking slower than he did. And then the dreams started. They were vivid, lifelike. He would wake up in the orphanage, not near it, in it. The air thick with the smell of burnt sugar and oranges, the halls longer than they should be, warped, the walls breathing in slow pulses like lungs filled with ash. The laughter, always there, never quite behind him, spilling from every cracked doorway and broken tile, echoing from rooms that hadn't existed before. And always, always, at the end of the dream, a mirror, a full-length one, dust-covered, cracked, leaning against the far wall of the orphanage's cellar just beyond a ring of melted dolls. In the reflection, himself. Or something wearing his face, but charred, its mouth stretched too wide, a grin etched into blistered skin, its eyes burned black, and in one hand, a rusted bell, a child's call bell. Every night, the same dream. Every night, the same ending. The reflection would raise its hand, ring the bell, and whisper a single sentence in a voice that sounded just like his own. You shouldn't be here. By the seventh night, he stopped sleeping altogether. He tried to leave town, told his friends he was taking a break, heading west. He didn't make it. Somewhere along the empty road outside Felton, the engine cut off. All power gone. The vehicle coasted to a stop, the digital clock on the dashboard, frozen. 1:13 a.m. He sat in silence, surrounded by a fog that hadn't been there before, and then he heard it, knocking, from the inside of the rear windshield. When he turned, there were handprints, dozens, small, as if from children, all smeared into the glass. He didn't sleep for days after that, told no one, but the laughter didn't stop. Now it followed him in daylight, in grocery aisles, public restrooms, stairwells. The sound would worm its way into silence like mold clinging to the edges of quiet. And always, as he turned toward it, nothing, except once. He was in his basement, organizing storage, boxes and old VHS tapes, his camcorder from college. The bulb flickered, then died, leaving only the flashlight beam from his phone. In that dim cone of light, the laughter returned, closer than it had ever been. He turned toward the old standing mirror near the furnace. It had been covered with a sheet for years. The sheet was gone. The reflection staring back at him wasn't delayed. It didn't blink oddly. It didn't whisper. It just grinned. And in the background, behind his reflection, stood children. Girls in soot-blackened nightgowns, their skin flaking like ash, their eyes wide and empty, their mouths open in a constant silent laugh. And standing in the middle of them was Eli Turner, burnt, smiling, his head tilted, holding a rusted bell. He doesn't film anymore. Won't talk about what happened in that house, not even to us. But the clocks still stop at 1:13 a.m., and the mirror in his basement, he boarded it up. But sometimes, when he walks past it, he hears the bell. And somewhere far off in Blackbird Forest, beneath broken roots and rotten beams, the laughter continues. Clock stopped, dreams burned, And the laughter followed him home. Subscribe, because you've seen what happens when the orphanage chooses a new listener. He wasn't supposed to go back. After everything, the dreams, the mirror, the clocks, he promised himself that door had been closed. He told friends the investigation was over. The orphanage was just another cautionary tale, a tragic footnote in Delaware's forgotten history. But something pulled at him. A thread he couldn't untangle. Something he missed. He packed light. Just a flashlight, his field recorder, and a weatherproof duffel bag with backup batteries. No camera, no crew. Just him and the forest. He entered Blackbird just after dusk. The path he'd once followed was gone now. Nature had taken it back. Trees twisted at unnatural angles. Bark peeled in long strips like curling paper. He marked his trail with flagging tape, though he had the sick feeling the forest wouldn't respect it. By the time he reached the ruins, the air had changed. No birdsong, no bugs, not even wind. Only that strange, waiting stillness. The kind that makes a man believe something is holding its breath, just behind the trees. The orphanage hadn't crumbled further. If anything, the foundations looked cleaner, less weathered, more defined, as if something underneath was holding it up. He stood in what was once the dining hall. Moss crept down the walls, and fragments of scripture were still faintly legible on the far side. The motto was still there, carved above the blackened fireplace. Through joy, we cast out sin. He stepped further in, following the crunch of broken tiles underfoot. His flashlight caught the glint of something metallic, just beyond a collapsed section of roof. It was a tape recorder, old, analog, still running. He stared at it for several long seconds before reaching down. The tape was halfway through. He pressed stop, rewound, pressed play. And then he heard his own voice. They made me laugh. The voice was strained, cracked. He didn't remember saying the words, didn't remember ever recording this, but there was no mistaking it. This was his voice. I couldn't stop. There was a pause, a long inhale. Then, now I'm here too. He froze. Laughter began to echo across the ruined foundation, not from the tape, from behind him. He turned, but no one was there. And then came the voice. Low at first. A soft hush carried by the wind, like a breeze learning to speak. It called his name. Twice. Then, from the darkness, a shape moved. He raised his flashlight, the beam slicing through the dust and decay. It was Eli. Or something that wore his face. His hair was matted with ash, skin blistered in places, but not decayed. His smile, too wide. His mouth opened, and what came out wasn't a voice. It was voices. Children, all layered over one another. Different ages, different accents, all speaking at once. You heard us. You came back. You listened to the laughter. He stepped back, the beam shaking in his hands. Eli, or whatever this thing was, kept walking. Every step made no sound. Behind him, the walls of the orphanage seemed to shift. Doorways, where there hadn't been any. Windows blooming open like wounds. The air warped, like heat over pavement. Then, the children appeared. They stood in the hallways, in the corners, behind shattered beams. All identical. Same face, same smile, same missing front tooth, dozens of them. No blinking, no breathing. The laughter began again. Not from mouths, but from the walls. From inside the stone. From the floor beneath his boots. The thing that wore Eli's face raised a burnt finger and pointed toward the investigator. It spoke again, voice layered with dozens of small, innocent tones, warped by something ancient underneath. You stayed too long? We told you in the mirror. Now, you hear it too. He backed away, stumbling against a collapsed chair. The recorder was still in his hand. He dropped it. The children all took a step forward in perfect synchrony. And then, sudden silence. Everything stopped. And from deep inside the ruin, the investigator heard a bell. Once, twice. The children didn't flinch. He turned to run, but he found himself somewhere else. Not the woods, not the orphanage. A long hallway, wooden floors, white walls stained yellow, doors on either side, all closed. At the far end, another mirror. He didn't walk. He was pulled, drawn forward like a puppet on strings. When he reached the glass, he knew what he would see. His reflection. Burnt. Smiling. In the reflection, he was standing inside the orphanage again, in the dining hall, surrounded by children who laughed and laughed, but their mouths never moved. He reached out to touch the mirror, and his hand passed through. That was the last anyone heard from him. Search parties found nothing. No trace, no gear, no flagging tape, only a single tape recorder. Still warm, still running. On the tape, the final recording ends with a breath. And a child's voice, familiar and layered, whispers, "Now we're all laughing, and we're never alone again." He heard his own voice before he even spoke. If you've made it this far, you need to subscribe, because once you've heard the laughter, you're part of it now. They sealed the trailhead 2 days after the final search crew pulled out of Blackbird Forest. The official statement from the state's Department of Natural Resources mentioned a chemical contamination event, traced, they said, to an old illegal dumping site buried deep beneath the tree line. Air and soil samples had returned inconclusive, but strong enough indicators of toxicity warranted closure until further notice. Of course, they didn't say a word about the names scratched into stone walls, or the sound recordings, or the 52 photographs they never released to the press. The forest became off-limits. The fence went up fast, so did the cameras. Warning signs, too. Not your typical no trespassing fare either. These signs looked federal. Blank faces, no seal, no logo, just sterile printed notices warning of criminal penalties and silent cameras that tracked even the birds overhead. And still, people went in. Not many, but some. Hikers, explorers, kids with TikTok accounts chasing clout. They never found anything obvious. Not anymore. The ruins of the orphanage had caved in completely. Where stone once jutted like broken teeth from the undergrowth, now there was only a dip in the forest floor, blanketed in leaves, like the earth had swallowed it whole to forget it. But the sounds still came. A family walking the outer loop of the Blackbird Marsh Trail, well outside the restricted zone, reported hearing children laughing somewhere to the northeast. They thought nothing of it until the father realized the trail didn't extend in that direction, and there were no other visitors logged in at the ranger station that day. A week later, a trail cam captured footage of something strange. 12 frames, 1/2 second. A child, standing still in the middle of a clearing. Same dress as the others, same posture, same hollow eyes. The footage was deleted from the state archive 2 days after it was reviewed. The man who found it, low-level forestry tech named Carl Winston, was reassigned, quietly. His co-workers said he stopped speaking about the Blackbird file completely. He now works in an office in Wilmington, never goes near the forest. But the most chilling discovery came weeks after the second disappearance. A hunter, walking the outer boundary in early spring, noticed something unnatural near a downed tree, a disturbance in the earth, recently turned. No animal tracks, no tools, just unsettled soil. He assumed it was a coyote den until his boot struck something hard. He dug it out with his bare hands. A box, plastic, sealed with wax. Primitive, like something ritualistic rather than protective. Inside was a single object, a handheld audio recorder, battered, weather-worn, and mostly intact. It was his. The missing investigators, Even after weeks in the soil, the batteries still held a charge. There was only one audio file, just over 4 minutes long. The voice on the recording? Unmistakable, calm, measured, but frayed at the edges, like someone who'd come to accept the unacceptable. If you're hearing this, don't come looking. I'm not lost. A long pause, then static, then it's not a haunting. It's a memory on loop. A breath. The forest isn't cursed. It's remembering. Every child that screamed, that laughed, that believed, they're still here. Their joy didn't cleanse them. It caged them, bound them in echoes. It wasn't a fire that freed them. It was laughter that locked the doors shut. Then, one final whisper, barely audible, warped. I smiled too long. The recording ends. The hunter turned the device over to authorities. It was never logged, but a copy made it to a private, paranormal forum 2 weeks later. The post was anonymous. The file link was taken down within hours. Still, it spread. Dozens of users who downloaded the file reported hearing different things at the end. Some heard names being whispered. Others, the sound of fingernails scratching wood. One claimed the recorder said his name and his birthday before cutting off. But one thing was consistent: the laughing. Software layered. Children's voices blending together in perfect unison. Not joyous, not playful. Just endless. Like a sound stitched into the very bones of the forest. Like the forest itself was trying to speak. And now, those who go near Blackbird after sunset say the air feels wrong. Thicker. Some report time distortions, missing hours, watches stopping at 1:13 a.m. One woman claims her dog barked at nothing on the edge of the trees. And later, she found a child's drawing in the backseat of her car. No one could explain how it got there. It showed a group of children standing in front of a burning building, all of them smiling. Every single one had the same face. Some stories fade because time swallows them. Others because something wants them forgotten. But a few sink their roots into the ground and grow backward. They unlive. They rewind. They echo. And no matter how deep you bury them, they find a way to surface, like a laugh that lingers too long, in a place that should be silent. Blackbird Forest is closed, but the story isn't. Subscribe now, because the next tale takes us to Maryland. And what still breathes inside those forgotten asylum walls is waiting. What you've just heard is not just a story, it's a warning. A record of what remains when silence fails to bury the past. When forgotten laughter becomes the foundation for something unholy. They called it an orphanage, but it wasn't a home. It was a theater of forced smiles, where innocence was peeled away by fire and ritual, and laughter became the sound of suffering too deep to scream. And yet, that was only Delaware. There are others, other places where the light never touches the floor, where forgotten institutions rot beneath moss and time and shame, where the records were scrubbed but the memories remember themselves. In Maryland, they say there's an asylum that was never officially built. No paperwork, no blueprints, no roads in. Just a path through the trees that appears only at dusk. The people who find it, they never quite remember how. And those who return, if they return, speak of rooms that weren't made for humans. Doors that open into echoing black. And voices. So many voices, whispering things that were never said out loud, but somehow feel like your own thoughts. You've made it this far. But the truth? You're only just beginning to see what hides in America's forgotten places. So if your mind can take the weight, if your spine can bear the chill, and if you're brave enough to keep looking into the darkness. Subscribe to MindFuel, because nightmares don't need to be imagined. Some of them are just waiting to be heard. If you think this tale was chilling, wait until you hear what's lurking in Maryland's forgotten asylums. Subscribe to MindFuel and fuel your nightmares with every new upload.